Welcome to the fourth episode on the Woodwind Doubling channel. This is the first in a series of programs on my own personal setups on instruments. It's almost a number one question that musicians get, especially saxophone players, woodwind players. What's your setup? I met Phil Woods once, and he bemoaned the fact that young music students, the first words out of their mouth were quite often, "What's your setup?" I think he was contemplating having a business card printed up with his setup on it so he could just hand it to them and say, "Here, now ask me something important." But it is important, if you're going to try and deal with doubling on a woodwind instrument, to have a setup that works well for you. Something that produces characteristic sound within the styles that you're being called upon to play, and that plays in tune and plays with the tone quality that you like. Now, out of those three factors, I always go number 1 for response, number 2 for intonation, number 3 for tone quality. That being said, here's my personal alto setup. This is a Jupiter, and it's the 1167 model. I just moved to this one this year after using a Jupiter 800 Artist Series Alto, which was a silver-plated body and solid silver neck. I used that one for probably close to 20 years, at least as long as they'd had that model out. And I didn't think I'd ever be swayed by another alto, but when this one came up and I tried it out, it's like, yeah, this is fantastic. So I made the change this year to it, and I use this alto all the time now. If I was going to do an outdoor gig where I was worried about the weather, I still have the 800 as a backup. I might actually use that in such a case. But really, honestly, I try to avoid gigs where I know it's going to be raining. So this is a pretty standard kind of setup, lacquered body and keys. It does have a high F sharp key on it. Other than that, nothing really go fancy. It's just really, really nice playing alto. Oh, one other feature. I almost forgot about this. This has a beautiful little setup here. It's got adjustable palm keys on it. You can actually, here, we'll zoom in, manual zoom, adjustable palm keys there. And you can see that that comes out on with a little Allen key adjustment, so you can fit the instrument to your hand. Now, I used to use those bulky rubber slip-over cover things on the keys, and they worked, but eventually they'd come apart, they'd come off, and wasn't really the best solution. This is fantastic. Now, mouthpiece-wise, that is a New York Meyer, number 5 or 6. I'm nearly not quite sure what the original numbers were. It's been worked on a bit. I got this mouthpiece from my good friend, the late Del Daco, and it was passed on to me, and he told me that I believe Phil Barone worked on it. It's clearly been refaced, but it's a spectacular player. Mated with that is a 2.5 Leger signature reed and a Rovner ligature. And that's what I use for playing pretty much everything. If I'm doing a straight classical gig, which I've done before as a soloist, I've actually got a couple different setups that I've used, although most recently I've used a plain old plastic Yamaha 4C mouthpiece with like a Van Dorn 3.5 blue box reed on it. And that you can get a really, really fine classical sound out of. It really kind of tames a bit of the wildness of the instrument. Most recently, I've used that with the Brampton Concert Band as a guest soloist playing Catch Me If You Can by John Williams. But for pretty much everything else, playing lead in big bands, say like with the Orange Devils big band in Toronto, I'm using the Meyer. Occasionally, I'll pull out a Jody Jazz hard rubber number 6 that I have. Very close to this in general conception. I find it needs maybe a touch softer reed. I can play the same cane reeds with it, but with the Legers, I find that I need about a quarter strength softer just to make that really play at its best. So for just about everything that I do these days, that's my setup. I do have another alto that's a very treasured possession, and I'm going to let you have a look at that one just a second. Okay, back with my other alto. This one I only pull out for some very special occasions. I've pulled out once already to use with the Orange Devils big band, and I'm going to be doing a gig soon with Jim Galloway's wee big band. Now, Jim passed on a couple years ago, and Martin Loomer leads the band now, and usually I play baritone in it, but this time I'm playing the lead alto chair. Now, my predecessor in the band, Gordon Evans, a man who I respect and admire, he played lead in that band from its inception up until he was well into his 90s. We played in sections together for going on 20, 25 years. he was at an age when most players are considering retiring, or most people who work would consider retiring. And he was still going strong. And even into his 90s, he was still playing, although his eyesight was failing. Most people would think the musician's hearing would fail at that age, but it was his eyesight. We used to get on the phone with him, and you'd talk loud because you were talking to somebody older, and he'd say, "Well, I'm not deaf. I'm losing my sight, but I'm not deaf." So Gordy was quite a character, and he had a pair of old Con Altos, Con 6Ms. One of them from the 30s, which he used quite a lot, and I think just about really wore out the mechanism on it. And then he had a backup that was from 1941. And he'd been playing that one over most of the time that we worked together. So all the time that we spent in the Canadian tribute to Glenn Miller and in the Wee Big Band and anything else that we did, Gordon was always playing this alto, and this is his 1941 Con 6M. Now, I was very generously gifted this by his son, Morgan, and I've taken to referring this horn as the Holy Grail. To me, this was the horn that I remember in Gordy's hands, and every time I pull it out, I kind of feel his voice inside my head, just saying more vibrato. And it's still got his corked adjustments. We were talking about on my other alto, the Jupiter, that it has adjustable keys on it. Well, what a lot of players used to do before they came up with the little black rubber sockets for it is they'd put over cork, layer that up, and build it up to reach the keys, or you just tape things on them. I left it just as Gordy had it. I was concerned that when I got this instrument, I'd have to put a lot of money into getting it into playing condition. No fear, I pulled it out of the case and unstuck the G sharp, and away we went. Now, like all cons from this era, it's got the micro tuner neck, underslung octave key, which I always thought looked pretty hip. That means when you put the neck on, you're not compressing the octave key mechanism. Bell keys are on the left side, so if you play against your leg, they're going to sit against your leg. Most people I know play alto in the middle these days, so it's not really a concern there. And the mechanism, you would think on an older horn, would be really kind of slow. This has got a very, very fast keyboard on it. Now, when you consider the fact that Bird played a lot of his best recorded work on a Con 6M, it's hardly surprising that it's fairly easy to get around on the instrument. So, that's the two altos that I use and the setups on them. I'm just using the same Meyer on it right now, and we'll play it out with a little bit of a tribute to Gordy Evans. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Woodwind Doubling channel. Bye.